Hi, boys and girls. Dr. Ken Berry here, family physician. And for the next hour, I'm going to attempt to interview a good friend of mine, Dr. Robert Cywes. He is a bariatric surgeon and is quickly becoming known as an expert in the field of carbohydrate addiction, sugar addiction, food addiction. And yes, he is a surgeon who makes his living doing bariatric surgery, gastric bypass surgery, but he chooses instead, very often, to educate people and help them understand that eating what I call the proper human diet could very, very likely prevent them from ever needing gastric bypass surgery. I'm waiting for Dr. Cywes to join. If you have any questions for us about carbohydrate addiction, sugar addiction, food addiction, anything keto, carnivore, low carb, please type them in the comments. And if you know someone who would really benefit from hearing this interview, send them a quick text or an email or a phone call or go grab them by the hair of the head and drag them in front of a monitor so they can watch this. And maybe, just maybe, we can help these guys improve their health and prevent some catastrophic metabolic disease that's surely coming up the road for them if they don't stop it. Still waiting on Dr. Cywes to join the interview. He should be joining momentarily. Somebody might need to help him with this. This is awfully technical. I don't know. He might need some help. Let's see. Hey, Paintsville, Kentucky. I've never heard of that one. Where are you watching from? What city, what state, what country? Let me know. Anybody in Malaysia, Dubai? Anybody in UK? Jessica's in Arizona. Regina's in Washington. Ann's in South Florida. I still don't see Dr. Cywes joining the call. Hopefully his lovely spouse and assistant is watching. Maybe she can help him out. There he comes, I think. Yep, there he is. Yes, there's the good doctor. All right. So get your questions ready for Dr. Robert Cywes, a bariatric surgeon and quickly becoming known as the carbohydrate addiction expert doctor. See if I can get him joined in here. Doctor, are you there? Yeah, I can hear you great. How's it going?
Very well, thank you. Just getting used to all the technology, but this is great. You're a master at that, of course. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah. So how's your day been? What have you been up to today?
Working like a dog. You know, we're doing now with this COVID thing, we're, let me just shut some of this stuff down. Sure. We're doing a lot of telemedicine, and especially with people dealing with the challenges at home and that kind of thing, their stress levels are going through the roof, and the default option is to go back to crystal meth or carbohydrates, either way.
Yeah.
And helping them to deal with that is a challenge. One of the reasons I'm in my office, not at home, is to protect me from myself, from grazing and all the other things. So that's kind of how it's working. But we understand that, and really busy helping a lot of folks to do the right thing, even though stress levels have gone through the roof and the control of their lives has been taken away from them to a certain extent.
Absolutely. Now, before we get started in earnest, I really want to dive deep into sugar addiction, carbohydrate addiction, food addiction, because I know that's quickly becoming your wheelhouse. And I know you've dealt with that for years, but online as an influencer, that's quickly becoming your forte. Tell people about you, kind of your background, your history, how you came to wanting to do this to help people online. Who are you, and why should we care what you have to say?
Right. You don't really have to care what I say. If it resonates, do it. Too many doctors tell people what to do rather than share information that the smart people can do with them, with what they choose to do. But my background is, number one, I'm a fat guy. No matter what this looks like, the problem is up here, and it always will be. I topped out at about 300 pounds. So, you know, we share the same story. And the one thing I realized is I'm not evangelical about what we do. I'm not going to tell you to do what I do, because my other hat is as a physician and actually as a surgeon. And my journey started out in the laboratory about circa 1990, where we were looking at transplanted livers. And we were looking at feeding the livers, thinking that we could replenish their energy source and make these livers do well in the new recipient as they were transplanted. And we believed that the deficit was sugar. So we loaded these livers with huge amounts of sugar very quickly, developed great techniques of glycogen loading. And lo and behold, we found exactly the opposite effect. What we thought would replenish and make the liver better made it worse. And the more sugar you added to the liver, especially if that sugar started to become fat and you got fatty liver, those livers did poorly. But like any good scientist in the modern era, our results didn't fit the hypothesis. So we distorted the reality of the results to fit our hypothesis for a decade.
Yes.
And, Tim Noakes, a good friend of mine, and a few other folks have done the same thing, unfortunately. And it took me about a decade to realize that the data was right and our interpretation was wrong. And it was a very humbling experience to realize, for a physician, especially a surgeon, to realize we're actually wrong was very, very challenging. But once I accepted that and I could look at the science, I realized and saw under the microscope the injury that sugar did to blood vessels and the injury that chronic excessive sugar did to the cells of the liver. And basically what I was looking at in the early 90s, I was looking at diabetes in action. I was creating the injury of diabetes, the vascular injury, and I was creating fatty liver. And because I was trained to keep my mind open to ask the question why, I started exploring that aspect with my patients. And I very readily, just in interviewing people, found out that obese or diabetic patients, or really people with metabolic disease, on average, their total carbohydrate content is usually greater than 80% of their total caloric consumption. So it's this massive amount of carbohydrates that have added to our diet. And I'll explore that just a little bit as to how that works. But what I also realized working with the liver is an incredibly powerful organ in terms of producing sugar.
Yeah.
So while sugar is vital in the bloodstream, you don't have to put it in your face to stay alive. The liver doesn't produce certain proteins. It doesn't produce certain fatty acids. So we have to eat those. Those are essential in our diet. But sugar is not essential. And the other thing we realize is it doesn't matter how it goes in your face. What matters is what enters your bloodstream. So it doesn't matter if it's ice cream, chocolates, chips, pasta, bread, rice, syrup. It doesn't matter what it is. It's glucose that's going into your bloodstream, fructose or galactose. So we very rapidly realized that this was not necessary. So why the devil were people eating it? And what we realized is that for a certain subgroup of people, they're using sugar for the effect it has on their brain, not for the nutritional value. And Ken, the interesting part is if you look back, and I know we talk about tribes in the Amazon jungle, but if we look at tribes in the Amazon jungle, a lot of them, those Indians, chew cocoa leaves. And they use it as part of their routines, as part of their rituals. They chew them, they concentrate a little bit for medication because it's an opioid. It's an opioid, it's like morphine. And they have this wonderful effect with it, but nothing bad happens. Then people come and take those cocoa leaves and they refine them and they crystallize them. And now you've got cocaine and heroin. And now people are using that as a highly endorphin activating, instant rewarding drug. And in exactly the same way, I'm from South Africa. I've grew up with a lot of Bushmen and indigenous hunter-gatherer people, and they will dig up roots and every now and then find carbohydrates the way nature made it before we started farming and crossbreeding these products. And they eat carbohydrates, but it never causes harm. They eat it for survival. But then you take that tiny little apple and you hybridize it to this big apple like this. You take grass and you turn it into wheat and you hyper-concentrate the carbohydrate content. And then you've done exactly the same thing from cocoa to heroin. You've gone from rudimentary starch to massive, highly concentrated sugar. And we are no longer using sugar as a food. We're using it as a drug. It's camouflaged in our food system. But ultimately, the reason we eat sugar and starch is for the crystal meth effect, not for the nutritional effect. And therein lies the problem.
Totally agree. And just as a means of full disclosure, both Dr. Rob and I or we could say we're previous sugar addicts, but I would say we're sugar addicts in remission. And during this time of increased stress that we're all under, and please, no one mentioned the C word. I don't want YouTube to slap me again. We're, just the worldwide stress we're under right now. Even Dr. Cywes and I feel that urge to go and pilfer around in the kitchen and to go and be like, I wonder what's in the cabinet here. We feel that too, just like you do. And so don't think you're alone in this. Don't think this is some weakness on your part. Human beings by design are low carbohydrate animals. And when you addict a low carbohydrate animal to a high carbohydrate diet for most of its life, and it's eating 10, 20, 100 times as much sugar daily as it should, and you're getting an endorphin release from that sugar, you're going to addict that animal to that inappropriate food. And that's what many of us are suffering from. And even me, even with Dr. Carnivore, and I think Cywes is pretty much carnivore, we still feel the pull of the carbs when we're under stress. And so do not feel like this is some weakness or failing on your part. This is not your fault, but it is your problem. And so pay careful attention. And also, I was going to let everybody know that this will be available to watch later on Facebook and YouTube in case you can't get your uncle or your brother-in-law by the hair of the head and get them in here to watch this. It will be available on Facebook and YouTube later so that you can watch it or share it with them. Now, Doc, let's get back around to, so you're a bariatric surgeon. And so I would guess that you, by recommending a low carbohydrate diet, you've actually cut into your income a little bit. Am I right about that?
Well, Ken, let me just correct a couple of things with
Sure.
that are very important as I approach this from the addiction part. Is all diets fail. All diets fail, including the ketogenic diet, the carnivore diet, the cookie diet. They fail because diets specifically, and I hate the word diet, because diets specifically deprive you of pretty much your entire emotion management system when you're a metabolically challenged person. So diets remove your drug of choice from you. They kill your best friend, and there is no replacement. There's replacement on the nutritional side, but there's no replacement on the emotional management side. And by the time you're fat or diabetic, if I look in your emotional management toolkit, you've basically got carbohydrates and cobwebs. You take out those carbohydrates using a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, you've got nothing. You may get a little bit healthier eating carnivore, but you don't relapse because of a nutritional reason. You relapse for an emotion management reason. And yes, I'm a bariatric surgeon, but I do not use surgery as an alternative to not eating carbohydrates. I use bariatric surgery to help people to lose weight so that they can better wrestle with their addiction to carbohydrates. In other words, all because you put a nicotine patch on your shoulder, it doesn't mean you're going to quit smoking. You got to crumple up the cigarettes, go through the mental process, that deprivation and the replacement, and the nicotine patch may help you in that transition. That's how surgery should be used. But unfortunately, a lot of my surgical colleagues, because surgery is so powerful, it is the best form of caloric deprivation you can find. And that's ultimately what diets are. So it's very effective getting people to lose weight, massive amounts of weight, 100 pounds, 200 pounds, 300 pounds. But people typically don't keep that weight off, just like they don't with a diet, not because the surgery fails, but because they fail to address the root cause, which is a substance abuse problem. And substance abuse happens when you start out with a deficient emotion management system and you develop a dysfunctional way to deal with those emotions in an instantly gratifying way rather than a processing way. Whether it's alcohol, and the other thing that people have to understand about addiction, the diseases you get are defined by the substance you're addicted to. So if you smoke, you're going to get emphysema or lung cancer. If you're an alcoholic, you're going to get liver disease and DUIs. And if you're a carboholic, you're going to get diabetes, PCOS, and obesity. The problem is that carbohydrate addiction is the only disease that is named after the consequence. They called us fat. They didn't call us carbohydrate addicts.
Right.
They call you a crackhead or a heroin addict. They don't call you cold and blue. And that's the unfortunate part. Until we actually see this as the root cause, not the consequence, we're never going to be successful in treating this. If you just keep losing weight on whatever diet you choose to, but you don't change how you manage your emotional needs, you're always going to default back or do what a lot of people that successfully quit smoking do. A lot of people who successfully quit smoking gain weight. Why? They didn't quit smoking. They just did a drug transfer from nicotine to carbohydrates. So we want to really express that awareness. But if you make an addiction transfer or a emotion management transfer from carbohydrates to walking, carbohydrates to creative arts, carbohydrates to spirituality or human connection, you filled a negative void with something highly positive, and you can continue that for the rest of your life.
And somebody just asked a question, so you already said a few, but let's give the full list. What are some healthy crutches to use instead of going into the kitchen and getting the sugary drink or the sugary snack? What are some healthy crutches we can use to support us emotionally until we can deal with this without having to worry about it?
Right. Well, the first, I deal in concepts when I manage patients. I don't just give them fish. I teach them how to fish. And the first thing is this. The concept is that addiction is based on instant reward, instant high, instant gratification, and I may or may not pay the price on the back end. In a healthy emotion management system, you want to put the effort in up front. You want to put the hard work in up front and reap the reward on the back end for whatever you do. And in the middle, because the effort requires a time component, there's a meditative aspect to anything that is a healthy emotion management system where the act relaxes you. Let's say I'm going for a walk. The physical activity relaxes me, but on that walk, my brain relaxes and I can enter sort of a meditative space where I can connect with the issues that are driving my emotional tension. And if I can deal with some of the stuff that's making me stressed out and I relax that stress, I can now come back from that walk, feel really proud of the fact that I went for the walk, and I've become a more effective human being. Otherwise, I just bottle up all that emotional tension. So the things that are effort-based are physical, the broad aspects, anything physically active. And it's never about how long or how far or how fast you walk. It's about walking. It's about the joy of walking and the pride and the pleasure you have in it. Something creative, whether it's gardening or painting, sculpture, reading, writing, the stuff we're doing right now, this is very pleasurable for me. It could be fashion, photography, cooking is about an enjoyable experience and being proud of the carnivore meal that you prepare. The third one is either spirituality or meditation. And spirituality is not about going to church. Spirituality is about having a connection with a higher power where you can explore issues in your life and resolve those issues in that connection, that prayer connection, so that you come out rested and relaxed from that meditative experience. And the fourth one, which is the most difficult one, is empathetic human connection. And what it requires is a space where you trust the person and it is free of criticism or condemnation. And you then, as the person trying to use that empathetic space, need to expose vulnerability. And it's very, very difficult for people with an eroded self-esteem to expose vulnerability. But once you learn to do that, that is so much of a better way to go than repressing it by whacking it over the head with a tub of ice cream.
I totally agree. And I've got over 270 videos on my YouTube channel now to help people, both beginners and intermediates and hopefully advanced people. But let's stick with beginners. Let's say that somebody went and grabbed their sister-in-law or their mom and said, sit down and watch this video. Let's talk to that patient right now, face-to-face. What's step one? What's step two? Where do they even begin? Because as you know, we as a society, as a modern society, not just in the US, but any modern society worldwide, we've been misled when it comes to what is a healthy diet, what are healthy food choices, do we need sugar or do we never need sugar? All these things we've been misled on. So let's talk to somebody who only has ever heard of keto as some abstract thing that they heard about, but they have no idea what it means. Let's start with that patient and walk them through. How do you even get started?
Well, again, concepts, Ken. And I think the concept of keto has been hijacked by a group of people that don't understand the fundamentals. I'm going to ask you a question. When you're treating an alcoholic, how much conversation has to be had about what water to drink? None. No, it's about not drinking. None.
No,
It's about
no.
not drinking. Drinking is the problem, and then replacing the role of drinking. When you
Yeah.
talk about us, when you're trying to get someone to quit smoking, it's not about air quality. And
right.
yet, when we talk to people about the harm that carbohydrates do and the addictive nature of carbohydrates, it's been hijacked by a group of people that evangelically love to tell us what the healthiest food is to eat. It doesn't matter what the healthiest food is to eat if you're still doing crystal meth. So the fundamental objective is to get rid of carbohydrates. And then whatever you do eat is pretty much okay. But the other thing about addiction, it's not just about what you eat, it's also about how you eat and why you eat. The pattern is snacking, and a snack is always an emotional event. It's never a nutritional event. Okay? So understanding those principles, this one other question for you. How do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time, baby, with some butter and with some bacon grease.
Exactly right.
That's how I eat it.
Exactly, and they taste great. No, I didn't say that. So the point is that people love to, here's your diet sheet, off you go and do it. And tomorrow I'm going to start, and they start everything at once and they crash and burn. Because when you withdraw any drug, you go through withdrawal, mentally and physiologically. But if you step into it slowly, if this is going to be a sustainable lifestyle, and I like a keto lifestyle, I hate the word diet. Because a diet has an endpoint. There's no endpoint to the lifestyle. Well, it kind of ends 10 minutes after you die. But the point is that if you engage in this slowly and eat the elephant slowly and do it in stages, you can tolerate those stages. And in addiction management, it is always about removal and, more importantly, replacement. So the first place that I get my people to start, stage one, are the fluids that we drink. And you want to create a sharp line. You want to drink for hydration and eat for nutrition. Period. So never drink your calories. And I understand the principle about all these keto coffees and adding a bunch of calories to your coffee. But ultimately, you want your fat to come from your hips and your belly, not from your cup of coffee. So early on, drinking a keto drink may get you into ketosis, which suppresses appetite. But long term, I want you to drink calorie-free fluids. Yes. And so the first step is to remove anything that contains calories from your fridge, but replace it with 6 to 8 different things that are okay to drink. And again, the keto evangelists will tell you, oh, the artificial sweeteners are so bad. Yeah, they're not great. But you know what? A Diet Coke is a hell of a lot better than a Coke. And if you need a Diet Coke not to drink Coke, I'm okay with that. We don't all have to just drink the water from the Rocky Mountains somewhere. So we're not about purism. We're about being healthier. So the first step is to stop drinking carbohydrates. But part of the drink thing, and you notice me going to this. You know what this is, Ken?
What is that? What do you drink?
This is my cigarette. This is my cigarette.
Okay.
In other words, I'm not drinking this for hydration. This is a cup of coffee that was made at 5 o'clock this morning. Okay. I'm sipping on this.
Yeah.
I do that every day, but I'm sipping on this not for hydration.
Yep.
But this, when I was fat, that was a Coke and M&Ms.
Yep.
Now it's coffee. It gives me a mind-cleansing moment. It gives me that emotional reprieve, and it's my go-to. It's always there. I've got a ritualistic relationship with it, but it doesn't harm me. Right. Now, some people say coffee's bad. You know what? I'm not a purist. I'm a pragmatist, and it worked absolutely fine.
I want to check that out later. So I don't think coffee's bad for you. This is my cigarette, and what I've been drinking lately, Doc, is half Topo Chico, sparkling water, and half iced coffee, and I call it coffee cola. So I get the bite of the Diet Coke without any of the bullshit chemicals, and then some coffee for my little caffeine habit, right? So this keeps me happy and satisfied, and it keeps me from pilfering around in the cabinets.
You're exactly, and you know, I've coined a word for that, and I've kind of branded this word. It's called a bridge, because a snack is something we consume for our heads, an emotional event that contains calories. Whether they're keto snacks or not, it doesn't matter. A bridge is something that gets you over that mental moment to put something in your face that does no caloric harm. So it bridges me over that moment without harming me. And you want to develop, so in stage one, you want to develop a relationship with a bridge. But when you open that fridge, you want to see 6 to 8 things that you can have, but no calories, no carbohydrates.
Yep.
Then, and you want to consolidate that stage, because if you open the fridge looking for a Coke, darn, there's no Coke. Well, there's just water. Okay, I'm going to the store to get the Coke. However, if there's no Coke here, but there's a Diet Coke, there's a Fresca, there's some Crystal Light, there's some water, there's coffee, there's tea, there's light Lipton iced tea. I've got my choice. I can make that choice, which is always a safe choice. and I'm not after perfection. The next stage, and this is where we dovetail so many aspects, and we were using the concept of intermittent fasting before Jason put words to it. The next concept is to get yourself into ketosis by removing carbohydrates and fat fortifying all of your food. There's one food class that contains pretty close to zero carbohydrates, and those are animal products. And the leverage toward the carnivore diet is because it's so easy. I don't do it because it's healthy, no, it's just easier for me to do. But I would advocate, don't jump straight into carnivore. Go through an omnicarnivore stage where you're eating some vegetables, maybe even some starchy vegetables, but in stage 2, which is the meal stage, preordain 1 or 2 meals per day and anchor your day around those meals in a preemptive fashion. So I know when I'm going to eat tonight. I know when I'm going to eat in the during the daytime. And for most people, breakfast is the least important meal of the day. The reality is your liver gives you breakfast, which is a surge of sugar called the dawn effect. So most people don't need to eat breakfast. I have a cup of coffee. But if you do, eat breakfast. It's not a crime.
I totally agree. And go ahead, Doctor. Continue. You're on a roll.
So on that plate of food, this is the stage where I remove rice, I may remove potatoes of any kind, and I remove all grain products. I don't care if you want to eat beans or lentils or other starchy vegetables during this stage, because the move is away from the obvious badass carbohydrates, which are and the addictive carbohydrates, where I will eat mashed potatoes until I'm so full I can't move. But I'm not. If you're the guy that comes home and pigs out on broccoli, we've got a problem. Nobody does. So while broccoli and some of those lentils and things may contain some starch, if you're a nutrition purist, you say, oh, you mustn't eat that. If you treat this as an addiction, you're not going to overdo them. And easing into this as you reduce your carbohydrate load, that's absolutely fine. The 2 other elements I like to add at this stage to all my food is, number 1, soluble fat. Whether it's butter, whether it's bacon, whether it's a ribeye steak, whether it is cheese or eggs, olive oil, coconut oil. And the reason for that is there's a biologic reason. Because saturated fat is the mechanism the human body uses to give us biochemical satiety. There are a series of hormones throughout the gut and in our fat cells that mediate satiety. That's why it's impossible to get fat from eating food. Food, by definition, what's essential, because the human body controls it in a negative feedback pathway called homeostasis. You can't overdrink water. You can overdrink alcohol. You can't overeat food, but you can overeat carbohydrates. So you want to activate that leptinoid, not leptins, but the leptinoid pathway. And saturated fat in your diet does that. Soluble fat gives you that early sense of satiety, but then you have to recognize it. You don't want to pig out through that and, oh my God, I'm feeling disgustingly. No, stop when you begin to feel full, and the leptinoids will continue to increase. So we add soluble fat. And then the other key element, which most doctors, well, you know what, my doctor can have his heart attack on my behalf because I ain't going to have one. And that is to add salt to your food. And I mean, right here, it sits on my desk. There's my real salt. And that's about 4 to 5 grams of salt. And I teach, yeah, okay, click. Cheers. So, I add salt to every little bit of food that I eat. And the human body can handle massive amounts of excess salt. The problem with sugar retains water just like salt does. But then you turn the sugar to fat, you turn the sugar to energy, and you're left with this massive amount of fluid that leaches onto the tissues. You swell up like a toad, or your blood pressure goes up, or your heart starts to fail. Salt regulates blood volume and blood pressure. It is there by design as human beings. Yeah. And you know what most people don't understand, Ken, is that the 3 places we lose salt. Everyone says, oh, your urine. Urine's number 2. Yes, we pee out salt, because when you pee out salt, when you pee out water, you don't pee water, you pee salt, and then the water chases the salt in the kidney. Same thing with sweat. Sweat's number 3. But the place where we secrete the majority of our salt is in the colon. And it is salt, fat, and water in our poop that prevents a carnivore from becoming constipated. Lions don't get constipated for that reason. So salt is critically important biologically in your diet, and salt also suppresses thirst and appetite to a certain extent. So because it's managing fluid volume. So salt and fat are critical. You leave out the big gun starches. And then progressively, you can remove some of the starchy food that you choose to.
Yes.
But
Everybody's
that
asking about our salt. We both have our little tiny vial of Redmond's real salt. I don't know if you can see that or not, but this is wonderful salt from Utah in the United States, and it's protected from all of the pollution in the oceans, the nanoplastics. It doesn't have any of that stuff in it. It comes from an ancient ocean, and it's buried under 30 feet of bentonite clay. And this salt was probably mined from about 400 feet deep under the salt lake in Utah. And so you're getting just the salt and minerals you need without any of the bullshit that's in our modern ocean. Sadly, but truly in our modern ocean. And so I totally agree with you, Doctor. The way I've started describing the Homo sapiens sapien is that we are, by design, a low carbohydrate, salty mammal. That's what we are. And we're made to eat a very low carbohydrate diet by design. And I think that anytime you give a machine the fuel it was designed to burn, then you're going to get optimal function from that machine. But if you start putting sugar in your gas tank, it's going to mess up your engine.
You're absolutely correct. And just two little concepts about the salt is, you're right, sea salt is great. The problem with modern sea salt is it contains microplastics. And I'm not a plastics expert, but I think there's a guy called Rob Wolf. I believe it's him. There's somebody out there on the keto circuit that has a great talk, and I may be mistaken in that, so I apologize if I'm misquoting, but has a great talk on the harm that plastics can do. And it's those microplastics that come in sea salt that's a problem. The other key thing about mine salt is not just sodium chloride. Mine salt includes magnesium, calcium, potassium, the other electrolytes. And while salt spares that, the key thing about that mine salt is it includes a variety of electrolytes. So I think there's added benefit. Any salt is good, but mine salt is a little bit better. And that's what the real salt folks do. They're also very supportive of what we do for a living and are big proponents of this diet. So if it's healthy for you and you can do something good for our community, why not?
Absolutely, 100% agree. So we've walked our theoretical patient through the first few steps. Now,
right.
Let's say, go ahead, doctor. Yeah.
So step 3 is the biggest. Step 3 is the most challenging step, because that's the step. Hopefully you've consolidated your bridge and you're eating okay and you're in a semblance of ketosis. Because ketosis not only makes you stop eating when you're full and not overeat, it also keeps you full for a long period of time. And it's that prolonged satiety that allows you to drop snacking, to drop the frequent little meals and get to a 2MAD or an OMAD. But you get there not intentionally. You get there vicariously. I haven't eaten today. I've been up since 5 o'clock. I'm not hungry. I'm in ketosis. I'm fat adapted, and I'll eat tonight. So I'm fine. I'm not fasting. I'm just not eating. And that's kind of what animals do. There's an ebb and flow. But stage 3 is where you give up the snacks. And I don't care if it's a keto snack or a carbohydrate snack, because you can eat cheese and pepperoni and nuts as part of your meal, but don't sit there and pick at them, because snacks are like cigarettes. You have one here, you have one there. By the end of the day, it's a pack.
Yep.
You have a little bit here, a little bit there. And if weight loss is your goal, that is still caloric consumption that is not a nutritional foundation. It's an emotional foundation. Now, if you look like an Olsen twin, by all means, eat a few more meals, because all of your nutrition, all of your calories have to come from your mouth. But for most of us, and you and I can, we still are carrying a little bit of excess, and that ebb and flow is useful. And then the final step for me, the final stage 4, is getting rid of the fruit. And there are only 3 fruits that I say are reasonable if you're an omnicarnivore: avocados, olives, and tomatoes. Now, some people may argue the tomato. Again, I don't approach it from a nutritional macro. I don't talk macro at all. I talk addiction, which is binary. Either did or you didn't. But one of the critical things for me is your name does not belong in my eating plan.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because your name, if you think about an alcoholic who drinks a big bottle of vodka every day, when they get on an airplane and they drink those little baby bottles of vodka, that's what berries are. They're just little baby fruits.
Yep, I totally agree.
And while they may not have a lot of carbohydrate in them, so if you're a nutritionist and you're counting macros, but you know what? They're a trigger for addictive behavior.
Yep.
And the issue there is the trigger.
Yes, and I totally agree with that. And it's confusing because for most people, transitioning from the standard Western diet that's high carbohydrate, lots of whole grains, no saturated fat, when they transition from that to ultimately a ketogenic way of eating or a carnivore way of eating, there's a transition period. And there is always some degree of carbohydrate withdrawal in that. And a lot of people refer to this as the keto flu. But what people need to understand, and I harp on this all the time, and I know you do too, I would love for us not to call that the keto flu, okay? Because it is carbohydrate addiction. It's carbohydrate addiction withdrawal symptoms. Call it what it is. When smokers quit smoking, they have the quitter's flu. They actually call it that. When alcoholics quit drinking, they absolutely feel like they're going to die from the flu for several days, if not a week or two. That does not mean the smoker should have a cigarette to ease the quitter's flu. That doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean the alcoholic should just have half a beer just to knock the edge off of the withdrawal flu. It means they need to continue the course. And so I think for a lot of people, once they grasp that concept, oh, this is not keto flu. That implies there's something wrong with the keto diet or a low carb diet. Or you see what I'm saying? That implies that it's somehow dangerous or faddish. Basically, what you're doing is you're returning to the proper human diet. But to get from the standard Western diet to the proper human diet, you're going to have to go through a period of carbohydrate withdrawal symptoms. There's no way around that. Just like the drinker's got to quit and he's got to suffer for a minute, the smoker's got to quit and she's got to suffer for a minute to get back to normal. Does that make sense? And so a lot of people are saying, well, I've been using a little butter in my coffee. And when you first are transitioning to this way of eating, I think that's an absolutely very powerful tool, very useful. But Dr. Cywes and I are talking about ultimately, when you're completely fat adapted and you're used to this, you won't add fat to your coffee anymore. You just won't need to do that. As you're transitioning from standard Western diet, the crap diet, to a low-carb keto carnivore way of eating, you may eat some berries. You may eat a lot of broccoli and asparagus and Brussels sprouts. And then I've had people, doctor, who when they're like, I'm going to try carnivore. And so they were eating maybe 50 total grams a day of keto approved carbs, right? You know, berries and nuts and broccoli and cauliflower. And they have another secondary carbohydrate withdrawal symptom for 3 to 5 days when they transition from keto to carnivore. So I think ultimately we should eat a very, very, very low carbohydrate diet on a daily basis our entire lives. I think that is the proper human diet. But to transition from this place of disease and suffering, which is the standard American diet, to a diet of health and optimal function, it's going to be difficult. And there's going to be some withdrawal symptoms that you're going to have to suffer from. There's not really a way around that. Making sure you get plenty of salt, get all your electrolytes, and use your fat as a lever if you're hungry. Eat a little bit in your coffee or a fat bomb if you need it when you're starting. But ultimately, you're not going to need any of those. I call them hacks or crutches, and I think those are appropriate terms because they help you. It's almost like a crutch or like a brace or like a cast. It helps you while you're healing. But if you break your leg, you're only going to wear the cast long enough until the bone heals and can bear the weight again. Then you're going to throw the cast in the garbage. And that's what you will do ultimately when you have transitioned completely to a low-carb proper human diet. You'll throw away the casts and the crutches and the splints. You won't need them anymore. And so ultimately, that's what we are talking about. And we're not saying that berries are bad or tomatoes are bad. See, I can't touch any nightshade or I start to get inflammatory symptoms, but you can enjoy them. Probably a difference in our DNA. Your people came from much closer to the equator than my people did, right? And so you can enjoy that, and I just need to leave that alone. I get this question every live, doctor, and I ask all my guests this: what about honey? We all know without a doubt that honey has magical, mystical, powerful, ninja-like properties, especially organic, hand-groomed Maluka honey. What do you say about honey?
So again, principles. The problem is not carbohydrates, Ken. The problem is our relationship with it. The problem is not alcohol. The problem is a person's relationship with alcohol. So a glass of red wine has a lot of antioxidants. It's very healthy. But if you're an alcoholic, it doesn't matter how healthy that alcohol is. Wine or whiskey, it's on the no list because you can't control the relationship. Honey is a naturally occurring, highly medicinal form of sugar. So if you don't have a metabolic problem, and obesity is a metabolic disease, if you don't have a metabolic problem, if you're insulin sensitive and never had a metabolic problem, enjoy the honey. There's value to it. It's like a glass of red wine for you and me. But if you've had metabolic syndrome, and by far the overwhelming majority of people in this country have metabolic syndrome, whether they're fat or not, and you measure that by the insulin resistance, which we can talk about in a second, but if that's you, stay the hell away from honey. Because sugar is sugar no matter how it goes in your face. You know what I tell my kids, and I deal with a lot of children, is would you eat your dog's poop? And the answer, oh God, no, I wouldn't do that. So, but if I dressed up your dog's poop and turned it into this nice sweet syrup and made it smell really nice, would you eat it then? No. Shit is shit no matter how you camouflage. And shit is a medical word, I can use it. Shit is shit no matter how you camouflage it. And it's about what goes into your bloodstream, not what goes in your mouth. And when they understand that, then they understand. One of the early things I also talk about is the difference between, let's say, a donut and an apple. Oh, the apple's healthy. Additives do not make carbohydrates healthy. Additives do not make carbohydrates healthy. Because
whether
you
the
can
additives
find...
are added at the factory or whether they're added by nature from the tree, the additives that are added to carbohydrates don't make the carbohydrates healthy. That's brilliant. I freaking love that. I'm stealing that.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. Quote me, like I quote you. That's what we ask for. But the other thing I just want to return to is when people go through the keto flu or keto rash, which are signs and symptoms of withdrawal or maybe some oxalates or whatever it may be with a rash. But we really have to understand the biology, the science, the human science behind withdrawal. Getting into ketosis is very easy. You can do that by drinking a cup of olive oil, and you can measure ketones in your blood. Fat adapting is a whole change in the system of how your cells work. And it takes months, if not years, to properly fat adapt. What has to happen is the systems in your cells that preferentially burn sugar have to be downgraded, and the systems in your body that burn fat or ketones have to be upregulated so that you're preferentially using the source that's most readily available, fat. All because fat's available, it doesn't mean you're using it. You know, if you drive a gasoline car and one day you decide, I'm going to put diesel in my tank, and you throw diesel in your tank, which is like switching from sugar to ketones, that engine ain't going to work so good. You got to rebuild the engine so that it can be a diesel engine, not a gasoline engine. And exactly the same way the human body works. You've got to rebuild all the cells of your body so that they preferentially burn fat, not sugar. Jeff Volek showed that study in some athletes. It's called fat adapting. And the average athlete, primed human beings, take 90 days on average to begin to fat adapt, where their performance and their endurance goes up rather than taking a step backwards. And for us mere mortals, that takes a long, long time. You know, a mentor of mine, who is also an athlete, is a guy by the name of Tim Noakes. And Tim found out he had type 2 diabetes from carb loading. And it was a mistake that he made, kind of made the same mistake I did. But it took Tim eating a rigorous, massive carnivore diet 2 years to become insulin sensitive and to fat adapt. And that biologic process takes a long time. You cannot do it on a 1 month diet. And people need to understand that this is a process, a biologic transformation. The objective of a ketogenic way of life is not weight loss. Weight loss is a byproduct because it continues after the weight loss. So if your goal is to lose weight, you're going to fail. If your goal is to treat your addiction and ultimately make your body healthier, not be healthier, but make the systems in your body healthier. And in particular, when we talk about my 19-year-old cousin Vinny, it's all about the immune response, the inflammatory response. And carbohydrates are pro-inflammatory. And when you're on a ketogenic diet, it is anti-inflammatory. And that's part of health restoration. because your immune system is no longer diverted to taking care of intravascular inflammation, which I showed in the lab in my PhD, taking care of broken blood vessels. Your blood vessels are beautiful and smooth. And yeah, you might get an infection, or you might get a cold, or whatever it is, or over-exercise and have some inflammation in your muscles. But that's what your immune system is designed to do. Not every day go to work in an uphill battle to deal with the crap that you put in your mouth. So we're looking for health, and health doesn't happen in a day. It takes a lifetime of that conversion.
Yep. And that's exactly, I think the analogy of the alcoholic or the smoker is perfect for this, because the alcoholic doesn't expect to stop drinking alcohol and immediately start to feel better. It does not work that way. It doesn't work that way for meth or crack or cigarettes or any of that. Any addiction, there's going to be a period of suffering, but it's going to be worth it. You're putting in the work, you're putting in the time, you're putting in the effort. You're going to reap health rewards that you may have never even thought possible. And I know I get messages all the time from people online, and I'm sure you do too, Dr. Cywes, saying, you know, I'm 70, I'm 80, I'm 60. I had bariatric surgery and I overate it and gained back all the weight. But now, thanks to what you're doing, I actually know what the proper human diet is, and I know to avoid these things and to eat these things. And when I do that, not only does the addiction not call to me, but I actually burn fat. I burn my own fat. I don't have to burn carbs anymore. I can burn fat that I've stored for maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years back here. I'm able to burn that as fuel, which is how the human body's designed, by the way, folks. That's what the fat's for. It's not supposed to stay there as cushion forever. You're supposed to store it, then burn it, store it, then burn it. But a lot of us, we break that cycle and we forget about that. So I had a question come in and said, I'm a 70-year-old woman. Is it safe for me to eat a keto or a carnivore way of eating? And my answer to that has become my standard answer. I answer that question with a question. Are you a human being? And if the answer to that is yes, then you are absolutely going to benefit eventually from eating on the spectrum of the proper human diet, whether that's a very low carb keto diet or a keto way of eating, or if it's a very almost zero carb carnivore way of eating. Yes, that is the healthy diet for human beings. So if you're a human being, then the answer, I don't care what your medical issue, what's your problem, that is the proper human diet. How would you answer that question, doctor?
I think I would have a rephrase the question. I would say, is it safe for a 70-year-old to stop eating carbohydrates? And is it safe for a 70-year-old to stop drinking alcohol, to stop smoking cigarettes? Of course it is. Yes. And then what you replace it with is something called food. Now, the Eskimos are almost pure carnivores. The Bushmen, where I come from, are mostly omni and sometimes carnivore. Human beings, the beauty about being human, and the reason we've been so successful as a species, is because we can eat that full range of healthy food as long as it is not carbohydrate dominant. So absolutely, carnivore for me it's not a science choice, it's a simplicity choice. I'm not a very good chef. I love heating things up. I love chopping things up. I enjoy meat. But I've got patients of mine who like vegetables. And as long as they're getting in a decent amount of saturated fat and a decent full range of all the amino acids, all 20 amino acids, they're going to be fine. So for my vegetarians, at least eat an egg or some cheese. For my carnivores, it is not a crime to put pepper on your steak. You don't have to be a purist. You know what? And if every now and then you go out and have a salad, look up. The sky will not fall on your head. Purism is the enemy of addiction because control freaks cannot sustain perfectionism. There's only one guy that can do that. That's the guy with the long blonde hair and the long blonde beard. And you and I are not him. If people understand, that's the only person that is capable of perfection. We are not. So don't try to be perfect. Be compassionate. The only other comment I wanted to make to you is, yes, it takes a while to overcome the biologic addiction to carbohydrates. There's withdrawal. But when the alcoholic quits drinking, they go through withdrawal, but when they're sober, they feel great very quickly. So your body on a ketogenic diet feels pretty good very quickly. In fact, your diabetes and your IR goes away often before you lose a lot of weight. However, the slowest thing to recover is your mental health. Because you are still addicted here. And I know, the Dalai Lama is still practicing meditation. He's not an expert. And for us mere mortals, the continuous battleground here is how to better manage our anxiety and our stress and our depression and our anger and our fear and our frustration and our sadness and our boredom, which is prevalent right now, and our pleasure. What techniques can we better use to manage our emotional needs? And there is no endpoint to that. You know, when your CA score is 0 and your insulin level is 3 and your C-peptide is 0.87 and your blood sugar average is 72, you're about as healthy as you can be. And your cholesterol, your LDL cholesterol is 150, but your triglycerides are 43 and your HDL is 110. You're about as healthy as you can be as long as you're not taking a statin. But you still have issues up here. They do not go away completely. You can never be perfectly healthy here. That is an ongoing evolution. That is carbohydrate addiction.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I love it that you focus on the addiction model, because I think it's so applicable to this, because when you're trying to talk to people about macros, right? And the 3 macronutrients for guys who are brand new is protein, fat, and carbohydrates, right? And so those are the 3 macronutrients. Your diet every day has to consist of some ratio of those 3 things, unless you're fasting. And so I saw a question go by, I said, do I have to add fat to a keto diet? And so basically, you want to eat a diet that's rich in protein and healthy natural fat. Then it's your option if you want to add some carbohydrates, if you want to have some vegetables with that fatty meat, then that's okay, I think, and for most of us, and maybe not for all of us. But I think the carbohydrate addiction model is absolutely spot on, because people don't have to get sciencey. There's no reason for that, because just like I always ask the question, how many times have you breathed in the last 60 seconds, doctor? And you're like, hell, I don't know. I haven't been paying attention. And that's because your body's got that. It doesn't need your help to do that, right? How many times is your heartbeat? Have you not been tracking that? Do you not monitor that? Do you not measure that and record it? No. Yeah, you don't have to. Your body's got that. And when you're eating the proper human diet, your body's also, it's going to have your hunger. It's going to have your satiety, because you got hormones that are in charge of taking care of that. You don't have to think about all that stuff once you've completely transitioned. And some people, I think, can do it in a few weeks. Some people, it might take a few months. But I agree with you, doctor. It's always the middle part, because you could have all those numbers you just talked about. Every marker of health could be perfect, and you still feel like crap, right? Because that's the middle part. And so I find myself some days doing that. It's like, well, this is the lowest body fat percentage I've had since I was in my late 20s. That's good. All my lab markers are great. Everything's perfect. My life, I couldn't ask for anything more. I've got the perfect wife. I've got wonderful children. But then some days I'm just kind of down and I'm in the shits, right? That's not, and so in the old days, I wouldn't recognize that for what it is. I would think I was hungry, right? And I would use that word to describe, because I didn't want to put the true words on what I was actually feeling, which is boredom, which is complacency, which is laziness, whatever you want to call it, whatever it happens to be. But so many of us misunderstand the signals coming from our body and from our mind, because our previous diet has kept us so sick, so inflamed, so fatigued, we couldn't even really hear the communication coming from our body. But I feel like when you remove all the slow poisons and the inflammatory crap, you're actually able to hear your body again. And you may not like what it has to say. You may not like some of the places your mind goes, but that never means that you should just go get the bag of Cheetos or the box of honey buns, because that never solves the problem.
You're absolutely right. And, one of the things I focus on the carb addiction model is addicts are so busy clubbing every emotion with the same club that it doesn't matter how you feel. It doesn't matter if you're stressed, if you're depressed, if you're angry, or you're happy, because you got one club and it's called carbohydrates. But as you start to heal, as you start to make a change, what I ask people to do is, when you're standing in front of that fridge looking for a snack, step back and learn to identify and consciously ask yourself, how do you feel? Am I sad right now? Am I depressed right now? Am I happy right now? Am I really angry or frustrated right now? Because when you build an effective action-based diverse emotion management system, you then have a skill tool that you can apply differentially to each emotion. So when I come home and I'm sad now, Alexa's playing some music and I'm sitting in my favorite chair relaxing to some music. When I come home and I'm angry and frustrated, my dog knows he's getting a hell of a long run or walk. When I come home and I'm happy, I'm sitting down and bubbling over with my wife, who I love tremendously, is just the rock in my life, but we're sharing an empathetic human connection. So I now have skill tools for each emotion, but I can only apply them when I know how I'm feeling. And it's amazing that the smoker only knows that right now I need a cigarette, and the fat person only needs right now I'm hungry, I need something to eat. They don't identify the emotion. So it's stepping back and recognizing and naming the emotion and asking yourself, okay, I see you. How am I going to deal with you? And you can learn to do that. So that is, it's as important as the dietary nutrition component is the void that we leave. We leave two voids when we remove carbohydrates, a nutritional void and an emotion management void. And most of the keto people have the nutritional thing, whether it's appropriate or not, we can discuss that. But very few of them have the emotional void. And Ken, there's one other comment I just wanted to make, and that is another word that I absolutely abhor is the word protein. And here's why. Because the reason we got into this darn carbohydrate mess is in the 1950s and 60s, we blamed fat instead of nicotine as the cause of our cardiovascular disease. And as a society, we became incredibly lipophobic. So we took fat out of everything and food tasted like crap, so we added in sugar. But what remained was lean protein. And nature very rarely produces lean protein in an animal. The animal always comes together with fat. And if you read the Bible, we didn't kill the Arnold Schwarzenegger of cows or calves. We ate the fattest one. And there was a purpose, there was a reason for that. They knew about it then. But what we've done now is we slaughter the animal, we cut all the fat off, and we produce this lean, 90% lean ground. No, I understand the need for protein, but I try to get people away from that name because we are still lipophobic. Anytime you eat fat from an animal source, protein always comes along for the ride. Absolutely. You never have to worry about your protein. But what you want to worry about is eating the fattest ribeye, not the leanest fillet. And if you are going to eat the chicken breast without the skin, because the skin is where the fat is, add a little bit of fat. I don't say fat load, but fat fortify. Put some butter on there, put some mayo on there, put some cheese on there, put some bacon on there, because we have to understand that our society is still very lipophobic. And we, on this carbohydrate-free diet, need to add bits of fat in from time to time. Not fortifying it, not pouring fat on, but making sure that we activate our leptinoid system.
Yes. And so many dietitians and nutritionists will call meat a protein, right? That's what meat is a protein. No, meat by definition, unless we've bred the fat out, which is not anything that you ever find in nature. Meat is protein, yes, but it's also hundreds of vitamins and minerals and zoonutrients. I coined that term on a podcast with Dr. Paul Saladino. Everybody wants to talk about the magical phytonutrients in plants. I'd love to start talking about the zoonutrients in meat. And so meat is not just a protein. Meat is always a combination of fat and protein. And so I think that's a very valid point. We're coming up on top of the hour, Doc. Let me ask you a personal question. When you break your fast, when you get home to your lovely wife, what are you going to eat this evening? What do you think? What's going to happen?
So first of all, I never fast. Fasting is deprivational. It's starvation.
Yep.
And starvation has a role, right? Starvation has a role when you're fixing diabetes or obesity. It doesn't have a role in normal life. I'm just not eating because I'm actually eating that stored fat. So I've got that ebb and flow going. So tonight is a leftover night. I'm a carnivore. I always make more food at any meal than I can possibly eat because I want to get rid of portion control. So because otherwise we are so inbred with a finish your plate club, and I'll overeat because there's a little bit left on my plate. But if I've got a ribeye steak this big that I know I can't eat, there's going to be leftovers. And about every third night, we typically make an omelet and we throw the leftovers in. So tonight I'm having a leftover omelet. And I know it may sound disgusting to some. There's going to be some salmon in there. There's going to be a little bit of ground up hamburger in there. And I think one of the other leftovers we may have is a little bit of chicken. And then tomorrow night, we're going to have shrimp and scallops with garlic butter. So, those are already preordained, but those are critical elements to this. The only other comment I just want to make to you quickly, Ken, I know time is short, but the human body does not see calories. Protein and fat, which people measure in calories, are used either as a nutrient or as a so you can eat a lot of protein and none of it becomes energy. So you can't use the word calories because it becomes muscles. But carbohydrates are the only substance, the only macro calorie containing nutrient that are pretty much exclusively used as an energy source. Very, very little carbohydrate. And the type of fat is caloric fat. It's the gasoline that goes in your gas tank. It isn't the oil in your engine. When you eat fat, it can either be gasoline or oil in the engine. And same thing with protein. It can be used as energy or muscle. So we have to get away from the word calorie as well. And that is such a critically important point. And in addiction management, we try to do that.
Yeah, around my house, we call that the C word, and we're not allowed to say it. So tell us, Dr. Cywes, where can people find you? Because I know you've resonated with some people on this live. I could tell from the comments. Where can we find you if we'd like to learn more about the addiction model that you talk about? And if you really resonated with people, how can they learn more about you and what you believe?
Right. So a couple of things. First of all, these conversations that we have are very useful. But if you really want to address yourself, you need to take a deep dive into the whole principle, the philosophy. So we do consults. And you can set up a consult. It's usually paid for by insurance, but we have a self-pay rate. And you can text us to 561-517-0642, and we can set up a Zoom or a telephone conference. And that'll be a doctor-to-patient conference in the United States or anywhere in the world. I'm also, I followed your lead, although you are the Grand Master. I just love your social presence. But we have a YouTube channel. It's called Carb Addiction Doc. And I'm on Instagram as Carb Addiction Doc, and I'm also on Facebook. But those are the places we work. And I've also started a Patreon page. It's Patreon Carb Addiction Doc. If you value the information, support us, guys, both Ken and myself, because we put our heart, sweat, and tears into this as doctors. We really care about our patients more than we care about ourselves. But the reality is we still have to put food on our table. And if you can support us, if there's value to you for this, whatever little bit you can support, and I know times are tight, but go to both of our Patreon accounts, throw a few dollars our way. It really goes to making the content because we spend hours and hours and hours making this content, including this talk, for example. So I love the fact that it resonates with so many people. I always love the engagement with you, but there is a work element to it, and that's how we do things.
Yeah, I totally agree. Thank you so very much for joining me. We've got so much more to talk about. When you get a little break in your schedule, we're going to have to do another one of these, if that's okay with you. I put Dr. Cywes' links in the show notes on Facebook and YouTube, so you guys can just click on the link. And then there's also a link to my book, Lies My Doctor Told Me. If you are bored and want to read a book. But thank you so much.
Doctors.
Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thanks very much, Ken. Great talking.
Doctor. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining. As always, if you know someone you think this video would help, please share this video with them. You can send it in an email. You can send it in a text, a WhatsApp. You can scribble it out on a piece of paper, I guess, but that'd be weird these days. But please help your neighbor, help your family member, help your loved one to achieve the health that they deserve. No one deserves to be fat and sick and tired and miserable all the time. We can absolutely make that better. You can make that better. I can make that better. Together, we can make the world a better place. This is Dr. Berry. I'll see you next time.